The Empire appeared above Earth with black ships that blotted out the stars. They demanded surrender. Within 9 days, or every city would burn under their weapons, and the world held its breath as the ships moved like shadows over oceans and mountains. People watched from rooftops and cracked screens, and the silence of that first day was thicker than any storm that had ever rolled over the plains. The Empire message played on every channel with a voice that was not human, a voice that felt like cold metal scraping over bone. It told them to kneel, it told them they had no choice, it told them to understand the power above their skies, while the people below could only stare and listen, and feel the weight of fear pressing down on their chests. A child in New York dropped her toy as she looked up at the black triangle hanging in the clouds. She asked her mother what it was, but her mother could not answer, only held her close as the message repeated across every speaker and every phone. The soldiers on bases around the world were told to stand by. They looked up at the dark sky with rifles in their hands, knowing that bullets would not matter against ships that swallowed the stars in silence above the jungles and deserts and cities of Earth. The Empire ships drifted without sound, like sharks in the water, waiting for the prey to understand it was already dead. In Beijing, in Mumbai, in Johannesburg, in London, people gathered in the streets, looking up with fear and anger and hope that people were breaking windows and looting stores, while others gathered food and water in quiet desperation. The voice of the Empire kept speaking in every language, telling them that resistance would bring nothing but fire, that Earth was too small, too weak, too divided to fight the Empire. The president knew they were right in one way. Earth was divided, Earth was broken, Earth was afraid, but she also knew something the Empire did not understand, that humans had always been this way, that they had always fought among themselves, until an enemy came that threatened them all, and then they remembered who they were. She called the leaders of other nations on secure lines, telling them that surrender would not save them, that it would only delay the end, that the Empire would take everything from them, piece by piece, until nothing remained. She asked them to remember their people, their lands, their skies, and to decide if they would die on their knees or stand on their feet. She saw some of them break down crying as they looked at the ships above their cities, knowing she was right but afraid to say it, afraid to stand, afraid to hope. But in the quiet of that bunker she felt something else, rising, a heat in her chest that was not fear but rage that these creatures above thought they could take the Earth without a fight, that they could break humanity with words and threats. She stood and told her generals to gather every scientist, every hacker, every soldier, and every builder to find any way to fight, no matter how small, no matter how small, no matter how impossible. She told them that if the Empire wanted surrender, they would have to come and take it from the bones of those who refused to kneel. The voice of the Empire kept speaking, but now in that bunker deep under the Earth, it was no longer heard as a threat but as a promise, that the Empire would come and the humans would be ready to answer. 3 alien diplomats landed in a silver craft outside the White House, stepping down in the cold morning as cameras rolled and soldiers in black uniforms stood with rifles that would do nothing if the diplomats chose to kill. They were tall, with blue skin that shimmered like oil under the sun, and eyes that did not blink as they looked at the humans around them. They moved like shadows in water, graceful and silent, their voices soft and sharp like glass. When they spoke to the officials waiting for them, they said they came to negotiate peace and mercy, if Earth would submit to the Empire. And they smiled with thin lips that did not reach their cold eyes. The diplomats were taken into the White House halls, past portraits of old leaders, past flags that had seen wars and fires and blood. The soldiers watching them felt their hands shake around their rifles, but they held them tighter, reminding themselves that they would protect this place no matter what. The diplomats entered a room where the president was waiting with her generals and advisors. The cameras outside sent images of the meeting to the world, people in crowded rooms and empty fields, watching as these creatures sat at a table of polished wood and began to speak. They spoke of survival if humans accepted chains. They spoke of safety under Empire rule. They spoke of mercy as if it was a gift they would give if humans surrendered their lands and oceans and skies. The president listened with her eyes fixed on them, seeing how they believed themselves superior, seeing how they believed this world was already theirs. One of the diplomats placed a small sphere on the table, showing images of worlds burning, of cities turned to glass, of people screaming under the weapons of the Empire. The diplomat said this would be Earth if they refused to kneel. The diplomat said the Empire was giving them a chance to live if they accepted their place as subjects of the Empire. The room was quiet as the images flickered on the walls, and the diplomats waited for the humans to speak, waited for the fear to take hold, waited for the leaders of Earth to fall to their knees and beg for mercy. But the president leaned forward and asked the diplomat if they had ever heard the sound of a world refusing to die, if they had ever seen creatures of dirt and water and blood stand against giants, if they had ever witnessed the fire that lived in the hearts of those who would rather burn than kneel. The diplomats tilted their heads, their blue eyes unblinking, their lips curling in amusement, as they repeated that surrender was the only path to survival, that resistance was nothing but the path to extinction. The soldiers in the corners of the room felt something move in their chests as the president smiled without warmth, and the diplomats continued to speak of mercy that smelled like death and freedom. That meant chains and peace. That was nothing but silence under Empire boots, and the world watched as these creatures spoke, believing the Earth was already theirs. A street kid in Detroit hacked the alien transmission for fun using a stolen laptop with a cracked screen sitting in an abandoned building, where the rain dripped through the holes in the roof and the cold wind bit at his fingers as he worked. He had taught himself to hack because there was nothing else in the streets but hunger and cold and the need to keep moving or die. He found the Empire frequencies open like wounds in the dark spaces of the network, their signals humming with arrogance and cold order. They believed no one could touch them. They believed no human was clever enough to see the gaps in the armor of their machines. The kid laughed with a mouth missing teeth as the code unfolded in front of him, like a puzzle waiting for him to break it open. He sipped cold coffee from a cracked mug and sent packets into the Empire channels just to see if he could hear them scream, just to see if the gods above could bleed data. As he danced through their systems, the kid saw images of the diplomats sitting in polished rooms, speaking lies of mercy and peace, while the ships above circled like sharks over the cities. He saw the Empire calculating who would surrender and who would die. He saw the faces of the leaders who were afraid, and he saw the face of the president who was not. The kid liked her fire. He liked the way she looked at the diplomats, like she would set them on fire. If she could, he decided to send the Empire a message of his own, a simple message, made of stolen frequencies and laughter. He found a way to hijack a tiny slice of the Empire's signal and sent a single word in every language. He could find a word that meant no, a word that meant not yet, a word that meant fight. The Empire noticed the signal, a blip in the clean cold order of their network. They tried to trace it, but the kid was already moving, bouncing his signal off broken towers and dead satellites. As he laughed in the dark room, the rain dripping around him, the kid opened a live stream, pulling the camera feed from the embassy, where the diplomats slept under the illusion that they were safe, pulling the images of their cold blue faces as they rested in chambers built to protect them. The kid shared the stream to every dark corner of the human networks, to every phone and screen that could still light up in the shadows of the Empire ships above. He typed a message to the people watching, telling them to remember what it looked like to see the face of the enemy before the storm, telling them to hold that image in their minds because soon they would see those faces again, in a different light. The kid leaned back against the cold wall of the abandoned building and looked at the flickering screen and whispered to himself that it was time to see if the Empire could bleed. And outside in the cold streets of Detroit, people began to gather around the screens, holding their breath as they watched the faces of the diplomats, unaware that the Earth was about to answer. The diplomats sat at a table of polished wood, speaking of peace that smelled like death, while a soldier in a hidden crawlspace above them waited, counting each breath with the patience of someone who has seen war and lost friends to the silence. Before a battle, he watched through a crack in the ceiling, his eyes cold, his heart steady, his hands gripping the blade he had carried through burned cities and forgotten deserts. The diplomats below him spoke softly, telling the president and her advisors that surrender was the path to survival, that the Empire would spare the children if the leaders would kneel, that Earth had no future if it fought against the Empire. The soldier listened to the words but heard only the rustle of chains. The diplomats believed they were safe, protected by the technology of their empire and the fear they spread in every room they entered. They did not see the wires cut in the night. They did not hear the quiet boots moving in the dark. They did not feel the weight of human rage gathering around them. The soldier above them thought of the people outside the building, the mothers clutching children under the shadows of Empire ships, the fathers who could not promise tomorrow, the street kids with cold hands and sharp eyes hacking the signals of the Empire, the old men who still remembered what it meant to fight for dirt and sky and freedom. He thought of them and felt the fire inside him grow steady and calm, the president asked the diplomats what would happen if Earth refused to kneel, and the diplomats smiled with thin blue lips, saying that Earth would be erased city by city, forest by forest, ocean by ocean, until nothing remained. The president looked at them and said nothing, but her eyes were clear and bright with a promise. The soldiers saw that promise and knew it was time. The signal came as a flicker of the lights, a soft blink that no one else noticed. The soldier moved without hesitation, dropping from the crawlspace. Like a shadow, the diplomats turned their cold eyes upward, but too late. The blade moved in silence, through the air, guided by the will of a people who refused to kneel. The first diplomat fell without a sound, blue blood spilling across the polished floor. The second reached for a device at his belt, but the blade found him before fear could reach his eyes. The third tried to rise from the chair, his mouth opening to call for help, but the blade silenced him as easily as the others. The room was silent except for the soft drip of blue blood onto the wood. The soldier stood over the bodies, breathing slowly, looking at the faces that had come to demand the surrender of Earth, and found only death. Instead, he looked at the president, who nodded, once her eyes sharp with the knowledge that the world had changed in that moment. The cameras hidden in the corners captured everything, the feed hijacked by the street kid in Detroit, sending the images to every screen on Earth and every ship above the world. The diplomats who promised chains now lay dead, their blood a promise that Earth would not surrender. The heads of the alien diplomats were placed on spikes outside the shattered embassy gates, broadcast live to every screen on Earth as a message that humans would not surrender to threats from the stars. The rain fell in thin cold lines, washing the blue blood down the steps as the wind moved the heads gently like grim flags of defiance. People gathered in the streets with phones, raised eyes wide as they watched the broadcast, some with fear, some with rage, some with hope they had not felt in years. The Empire ships hovered above the cities, their dark hulls humming with power as they scanned the signals pouring across the networks. The image of the diplomats' heads on spikes was everywhere, on every phone, in every bar, on every street corner, and in every shelter where families huddled under the promise of war. The street kid in Detroit leaned back against the wall, watching the stream. He had pushed into the Empire frequencies, his laughter echoing in the empty building as he whispered to the sky that the Empire could see now that Earth would rather burn than kneel in the bunkers under the cities. The soldiers watched in silence, gripping their rifles, feeling something old and powerful move through them as they saw the image of defiance above the gates of the embassy. The president stood with her generals in the command room, her eyes fixed on the screens as the rain fell on the spikes outside the embassy. She did not look away, she did not flinch. She let the image burn into her mind because she knew the Empire would now respond with fire above the clouds. The Empire ships shifted their formations, dark shapes, moving like wolves around the wounded world, their weapons charged with quiet light as the commanders on the Empire ships sent demands to the humans, demanding they explain the desecration, demanding they return the bodies, demanding they kneel and beg for mercy. But the only response they received was the silent image of the heads on the spikes with the storm clouds rolling behind them. The people of Earth felt the fear, but they also felt the spark that was spreading through the streets like wildfire. The spark that said fight, the spark that said no, the spark that said if the Empire wanted to break them, it would have to come down and try. The Empire ships charged their weapons as the sky darkened and the clouds cracked with thunder. The streets below filled with people holding what weapons they could find, rifles, knives, stones, old drones repaired with wires and tape, ready to fly into the sky with small bombs taped to their frames, ready to hit the giants above them. The old men and women who remembered the last wars put on their coats and walked into the streets to stand with the young. The hackers tapped on cracked keyboards. The soldiers checked their rifles. The mothers kissed their children and looked at the sky with fire in their eyes. And above them, the Empire ships saw a world that was not afraid to bleed. The Empire screamed from orbit, charging weapons to glass the cities, but the kids sent them images of their dead diplomats, while millions of humans took to the streets with rifles and drones and Molotovs, lighting the skies with defiance as the Empire ships, prepared to unleash fire. The world below began to move with a rhythm of rage and survival that no Empire calculation had predicted. In the dark alleys and rooftops of the cities, people gathered with what weapons they could find: old rifles, stolen pistols, knives wrapped in cloth to hide the glint of steel. The hackers flooded the networks with codes and signals, ripping into the Empire communications, spreading confusion and fear into the cold machines that watched from above. The soldiers stood on highways and in fields beside the farmers and mechanics and children who refused to hide their eyes, looking up at the black ships that hummed with power and death. Above them, the president spoke to the people through hacked channels, her voice calm and cold as she told them that the empire would come for them and that they would meet them with fire and steel and teeth, and the will to fight until nothing was left. The empire ships opened their weapon systems, beams of cold light forming under their hulls, ready to erase cities and oceans and forests. The people below saw the lights, and instead of running, they raised their weapons and screamed into the wind. The old men who had fought in wars that the young had only read about picked up rifles with shaking hands and stood beside the young, who held drones ready to fly into the engines of the empire ships above the oceans. The navies moved their ships into position, old cannons aimed at the sky, knowing they would not pierce the empire shields but ready to fire anyway. The submarines rose closer to the surface, launching missiles into the clouds, leaving trails of smoke against the dark sky above the cities. The hackers broke into the Empire's signals, flashing the images of the diplomats' heads again and again across the screens of the Empire ships, forcing the soldiers of the Empire to see what had been done to those who came demanding surrender. In the forests and the mountains, people formed, small groups moving quietly with stolen weapons, ready to strike at any Empire soldier who dared to set foot on the earth below the ships. Above charged their weapons, the earth below charged its spirit. The moment hung between the worlds, like a held breath before the storm, and then the first shot was fired. A drone patched with wires and scrap metal, flown by a child in a ruined building, flew straight into the beam of light, charging under the Empire ship, and exploded in a flash of fire. The people below saw the ship hesitate, saw the light flicker, and they roared as one with the sound of defiance that rolled across the cities and valleys and mountains and oceans. The Empire ships saw for the first time that this world was ready to fight until the oceans boiled and the sky burned. The first Empire ship fell from the sky like a black star, burning as it tumbled over the city, crashing into towers and streets with a roar that shook the ground and sent fire into the clouds. And the people who saw it fall did not run, they screamed in triumph because they had made a god bleed. The child who had flown the drone into the ship did not see the fire. He had already become part of it, and his name was whispered in the streets as a promise that the Empire could be hurt. The hackers sent the footage of the falling ship into the Empire signals, forcing every soldier on every orbiting vessel to watch as their invincible machine became nothing but scrap and flame. The president stood in the bunker, watching the fire outside. The cracked screens showed the people running toward the wreck, not away, pulling pieces of the ship with their bare hands, trying to find any technology they could use to strike again. The Empire responded with fire lances of light burning through the streets, turning concrete to glass and shadows to ash. But the people kept moving through the smoke and ruin, carrying rifles and knives and broken pieces of metal like teeth, ready to tear at the giants above them. The hackers broke the Empire comes, flooding them with the sound of the people screaming, not in fear but in rage and defiance. The soldiers on the Empire ships felt something they did not understand, a crack in the cold certainty that they would win without cost, without blood, without the taste of fear in their mouths. Above the oceans, the navies fired missiles into the clouds, the submarines launching torpedoes that streaked through the waves, seeking the Empire machines that hunted in the deep. The missiles struck the shields of the ships in the sky, exploding in brilliant bursts of light that painted the clouds in red and gold, even as they shattered against the defenses. The people below cheered because they saw the giants flinch. The old men with rifles fired into the sky, knowing the bullets would not reach, but refusing to be silent, refusing to bow. In the mountains, small bands of fighters carried parts of the fallen ship into hidden bunkers where engineers and mechanics ripped them open with torches and hammers, trying to find a weakness, a key, a weapon that could bring another ship down. The child in Detroit hacked into the Empire signals, again sending the message that Earth would not kneel, flooding the screens with the image of the diplomats, heads on spikes, and the falling ship burning through the clouds. The Empire commanders shouted orders, demanding the humans surrender or be erased, but the only answer they received was the roar of a world that had decided to fight until the last breath. The Empire ships circled the world in black clouds of metal, preparing to unleash destruction, as they had on 1,000 worlds before. But now they saw a planet that did not cower, that did not beg, that did not break at the sight of death. The people of Earth looked up at the giants above them, and saw not gods but targets, The sky burned with the fire of falling empire ships, as the people of Earth rose like a storm without fear, without hesitation, without mercy. The empire rained destruction on the cities, sending beams of light that turned towers to ash and roads. 2 rivers of glass, but the people moved through the fire like shadows made of rage and hope, carrying rifles, knives, and stolen empire weapons that sparked with stolen light. The hackers ripped the empire signals apart, flooding the ships with screams of defiance and the sounds of drums made from the wreckage of fallen machines echoing across the networks as a promise that Earth would not break. The soldiers fired from rooftops and windows using old rifles and empire rifles, using drones patched together with tape and wires, and dreams of freedom the mothers carried their children through the smoke, whispering to them that the sky was bleeding because they were brave enough to fight. And the fathers stood in the streets with iron bars and pistols, daring the giants to come down and taste earth blood. The old men who remembered the taste of war sat with grenades in their laps, ready to pull the pins when the Empire soldiers touched the ground. The Navy ships burned but kept firing missiles into the clouds as the submarines launched torpedoes at the dark shapes that swam in the deep. The engineers in hidden bunkers cracked open the stolen Empire tech and found the pulse cores that could be turned into bombs, and the fighters took these bombs and strapped them to drones, to motorcycles, to their own chests if it meant bringing another Empire ship down. The president stood in the command bunker with dirt on her face and blood on her hands, speaking to the people through hacked signals, telling them that they were not alone, that every scream, every shot, every step into the fire was building a wall that no empire would ever break. The child in Detroit who had become a ghost in the networks found a way to blind the Empire senses for a moment, just long enough for the fighters to launch another wave of drones carrying the stolen pulse bombs into the sky. Where the giants waited, the drones flew through the smoke and fire like angry insects, and when they struck the Empire ships, the sky split open with light and thunder, and pieces of black metal rained down on the streets. As the people raised their hands toward the falling wreckage, screaming in triumph, the Empire tried to regroup, to calculate, to bring order back to the chaos. But the chaos was alive. It moved through the streets and forests and mountains. It moved through the hearts of the people who refused to kneel, and the Empire saw that for every ship they burned from the sky, another would fall. For every building they turned to ash, another child would rise with fire in their eyes. The Empire saw that they could win every battle and still lose the war, because Earth was a world that would rather die on its feet than live on its knees. And as the last Empire ship fell in flames, the people of Earth looked at the dawn through the smoke and knew they had answered.